Hi, I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this evening's program on Voices from the Village. Not yet? Hi, I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this evening's program on Voices from the Village. Tonight we'll be talking about comprehensive immigration reform, immigrants' rights. I think this is an issue and a topic that affects us all profoundly, not only in our communities, but also on a state and a federal level. I think you will note by the diversity of this panel that reflects the complexity of these issues, and so I'm really looking forward to this discussion with these folks this evening. Let me introduce my panel, the people that are going to be involved, and I think it's going to be a very stimulating discussion on these issues. First, Paul Johnson. Paul from the People's Democratic Club and a public sociologist. Welcome.
Thank you.
Kathy Ruiz Goldenkrantz from the Temple Bethel and also from the Communities Organized for Relational Power, COPA. Welcome. Cesar. Lara, the Executive Director of the Monterey-based Central Labor Council, of course. Welcome, Cesar. And Luis Ojeda. And Luis, you're from the Northern California organizer for the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. So really welcome. Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you for joining us. As we usually do, we went out on the street this week and we asked the people of Santa Cruz what they thought about this particular topic, about immigration rights. Let's hear what they had to say.
This is Voices from the Village. We're in downtown Santa Cruz and we're asking people, do you think that undocumented immigrants should have more rights?
I think undocumented immigrants should have the opportunity to get more rights, like easier for them to become citizens, because as it is now, it's pretty hard and difficult for them to become citizens.
That's a really hard question. I mean, I agree, like, they're human and they're just trying to, like, survive in this really crazy economic world. And then at the same time, like, I feel like we have certain boundaries in our country to protect, or not only to protect, but to serve the people who are already privileged to be here.
I would like to see more controls on immigration, and the people that would come over would have like a promised job or place of employment.
I don't think they should have any rights, because if I go to Mexico, or any other country, I'm not getting any rights. I've traveled all over the world, and I personally don't feel that if someone can just hop right over and get all the rights that they want, and I go down there and don't get any rights at all, thrown in jail, and basically no one's going to help me, so that's how I feel on that subject.
Yes, I believe all Americans were at one time, in their bloodstream at least, undocumented immigrants. My grandmother came over on the boat through Ellis Island. So yes, they should have more rights.
I've traveled the world. I sympathize. There's a lot of poverty, whether it's Mexico or wherever you might be in other countries and third world countries. And I'm really glad to be an American in the truest spiritually patriotic sense, but I do think it's something that really has to be dealt with, and I don't think by building a Berlin Wall between us and Mexico is really the solution. I think there needs to be a simple process of how that can be done. But I think the other day I heard there's something like 13 million people living in this country undocumented, and even though they are a strong force for cheap labor, every day the world's changing. There's people who have been born in this country that need work, that are starving, their families are hungry, they need medicine, and that needs to be a real issue that's addressed also. So I think we just need to find a fair balance and equilibrium and a humane solution to that.
I don't know too much about how many rights they have all over the place, but I'm from San Francisco, and it's so many different ways I wanted to handle it. There's a term for it, but anyone that's even in San Francisco, if you're undocumented, you can still get a city ID and still start a new life from there. I agree with that.
That's what people had to say today in Santa Cruz. Back to you in the studio.
So not surprisingly, the people of Santa Cruz are both knowledgeable and opinionated about the issue. As we start the conversation, let's get a little background on our panelists. Paul, give us a little background on yourself and your work with the People's Democratic Club, and also as a public sociologist.
Well, specifically, I'll talk about immigration and immigrant rights and my involvement with that. But the movement for immigration justice runs through our history here on the Central Coast deeply and continuously. And I was fortunate to be part of that 43 years ago when I dropped out of school to go work for the United Farm Workers Union in the Salinas Valley. And over those years, I've seen many moments of progress, but not enough, not much. We still have a good 100,000 people living without rights, working and producing most of the wealth in our region, in agriculture and other industries. And my heart really goes out to the families that are divided by the border and or have lost family members attempting to cross the border. And I think we've come to a real decision point now. And I know a lot of people in the Santa Cruz region agree with me. And that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation this evening about what we can do to influence that decision.
And Kathy, welcome again. I have had the pleasure of working with you in a number of different things, and of course your work with COPA. Tell us a little bit about COPA and your work in the kind of the religious affiliated side of immigration rights.
Well, when COPA was founded, we have 6 issues that we immediately voted to work on, and immigration was right at the top. And it's 10 years old now, and it's longer than that in terms of formulating it. And when it was initially organized, and it's between communities within Santa Cruz and Monterey counties, they were primarily faith-based. It has expanded to 24 institutions, but 18 are faith-based. And this issue is at the heart of all of us, regardless of whether you are at First Congregational Church up on High Street, to churches, St. Mary's of the Nativity in Salinas, and that's a very different kinds of population, to the Unitarian Fellowship in Aptos, and to Temple Bethel, also in Aptos, but its members come from all over the county, and some from Monterey County as well. This is vital because of the stories that we have, that we each share. We all come from backgrounds of immigrant stories. And when we all recognize that in each other, it really brings it back to a level of understanding.
And Cesar, I'm a great admirer of the work of the Monterey-based Central Labor Council, and particularly your work as ED. Give us your background and kind of your engagement on this issue from that perspective.
Well, immigration is a personal issue to me. I've done a lot of work in my life. I've worked with United Farm Workers. I've been a congressional. I've been, active in my communities for a number of years. But, my mom came in a trunk of a car, and my dad crossed over the Arizona desert. And my story is very similar to other stories in our community. We have about 100,000 people in the Tri-County area in Monterey, Santa Cruz, in San Bernardino County that are undocumented. And they're the ones that hold our economy up here in the area. The number one job classification in our area is farm workers. That's where the large percentage of immigrant workers work at. And today, the average salary of a farm worker is $14,000 a year. So when we talk about community issues, when we talk about having stresses out in the community, I think we have to look at the economics, and we have to look at our community. And immigration hits home, and it might not hit home for, like in my family, my parents' generation, but we all came from somewhere. Yes. So that's why immigration is a really personal issue for the labor movements. Because working families and the union members I represent come from those voices, come from those backgrounds, and that's why immigration is one of our number one priorities, not just this year because of the flavor of the year. It's been, of course. but it's been a priority for many years, because workers at the lower level tend to be immigrants, and we all start somewhere at some time in our history in the economy of the U.S.
And Luis, just had the pleasure of meeting you just before the show. And welcome to our community here for your work. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with the Immigrant Justice Alliance.
Sure. I'm working for the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. I'm the Central California coordinator. So I do a lot of organizing with immigrant youth, and I myself was undocumented, since I was 4. Just recently received DACA, so I've been able to benefit from that program. But obviously encouraging others to do the same, and also really making sure that us as an organization, we have 10 affiliates across the state, from San Diego to Sonoma and Napa, really pushing the conversation about immigration reform and really making sure that we're really fighting for immigrants at the end of the day. That it's not just about getting votes, either Democrats or Republicans, but really fighting for the rights of immigrants and making sure that our parents, our families, everybody in the community that's undocumented is really being respected for the persons they are.
No, that's wonderful, and thank you for your work. So, Paul, the president says this is the moment. What's he mean? What are we to take from that, and how are we to move forward from that statement?
I think he's talking about federal immigration reform, but I think it's really true that we've reached an historic turning point nationally and also locally. I mean, the most immediate thing, of course, is that we're at a moment of decision in the next several weeks whether the Republican-controlled Congress is going to block the legislation for comprehensive immigration reform. The conventional wisdom is that if they do, it'll be at least a couple of years before that legislation comes back. So that's one question, is what is going to happen, one decision that has to happen, that's going to be made really in the next few weeks. At the same time that this battle is being fought out in Washington, D.C., here in California, because of the new political power, really, of many new citizens and young children of immigrants themselves reaching the age where they can vote. California is already moving forward in some respects and potentially could move forward in other respects as well. So we've kind of reached a turning point here in California. So I think the question that really comes in front of all of us is, what are people doing to try to influence that decision? What's happening? What can we learn from the examples of other communities? What's happening in faith communities? What is the labor movement doing? What are immigrant youth doing across the country? I think that would be really useful for us to learn.
And before we ask Kathy why this is the moment, let me remind you, this is a call-in show. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, even me, for instance, on this issues, please call 425-8844, 425-8844. So Kathy, your reflections or observations on this is the moment. What's going on
Well,
here?
this is the moment. Of any of the years that we've been dealing with this work in COPA and in a sense in my synagogue, this is a year that we have deeply engaged in it. And from the beginning of the year, when joining forces with the Labor Council and getting letters out to to the faith communities and saying we will sign this letter and send it to our state representatives in Congress and to our to United States senators that says we support comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. And those resolutions got sent and to the president and for some faith communities in this area. And including the Diversity Center, which is the first time they'd ever done anything that was outside of the LGBT movement, that we got those letters out, and it was gratifying. So, it pushed some people to really think about how important this is. And so, and from there, our rabbis went from doing that to inside California promoting the Trust Act and lobbying for it and the driver's license bill, and then now to get this moving in the Congress, to get it out of the Senate and into the House is equally important. And so we got to keep the momentum up. And in the Reformed Jewish movement, we have an office in Washington, D.C. called the Religious Action Center. And their job is to lobby on issues of social justice. We don't campaign for individuals at all. Party politics is out. That's true in COPA. But those issues that affect us as human beings are what move us and make us strong. And so right now we want everyone that's a Jewish American in the nation, but particularly right now within this medium who can hear us, to call, Majority Leader Cantor and say to him, let your people vote, meaning his votes in Congress.
And Cesar, we were talking earlier about, it may be the moment for the Senate, but certainly in the House of Representatives, there's a very different dynamic at work. Give us kind of your sense of that and what's going on with it.
It's really being stalled right now, and I think momentum has picked up. But before we go into that, we have to remember why we're here. The last November election, where President Obama was reelected, and a lot of the policies that he did in his first term really got another stamp of approval by the country itself. The Affordable Care Act was one of the big issues that President Obama in 2009 said the time is for health care. The community rallied behind it. We got the Affordable Care Act. In California, it's rolling out. And after the November election of last year, the Latino community showed our power. In California, in the rest of the country, it showed that we vote as a community, those of us that could vote. And we really deserve respect. And it really woke up the Republican Party. And immigration became a nonpartisan bill. And that carried forward all the way to the spring, into the beginning of the summer. And then Washington really got in the mud with the budget, with debt ceiling. And the time is now to really push for them to act. And, being a member of the Latino community, having parents that were immigrants, that they really did not have an opportunity to vote. So for our family is when those of us that could vote, we really not just vote for ourselves, but we vote for our family. And that's what November showed, and we can't slow down. It's we had a decent, maybe some people don't call it a decent bill out of the Senate. And a lot of us saying, let's try and fix it in the House, but it did not get fixed in the House. There was a new bill that was just introduced by Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, and that Republicans are slowly getting behind. Jeff Denham, conservative Republican out of the Central Valley, our former state senator and more in the Salinas Valley, just came out yesterday in support of Nancy Pelosi's bill. And so we're seeing some momentum in the House of Representatives, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen, and we cannot forget last November. And, the Latino community is not asking for a handout.
No, of course not.
We're asking for a comprehensive immigration reform to respect the 11 million, 12 million, depends who you talk to what the number is.
I saw 11 million, but, some say 13, some say 12.
And it's the time is now not to slow down. What happened was in the Senate, they had a comprehensive bill and went to the House. The leadership in the House broke it up into 5 individual bills. And then it really got in the mud and really stalled. Nothing really happened. And now it looks like they're grouping it back together, and there's some momentum happening. But we really have to not slow down. But we also, that's Washington. That's the politics there, and we're trying to get it done this year. If we can't, we have to keep up the fight next year. But let's try and get it done this year. But this was a good year for immigrants in general in California.
So, Luis, how are these bills speaking to your advocacy for youth immigration justice?
Well, we're really trying to push the envelope here when we're talking about immigration reform. It's really not just a one-step approach where we're depending on Congress. For us, it's really important to hold both parties accountable, remembering that the Democrats had a majority in both houses of Congress in 2010, and they did not push a bill. They weren't even able to push the DREAM Act. And so now that we have an opportunity to pass immigration reform, what we're asking is for the president to stop all deportations, because he has that power. he has that ability to say no more deportations until Congress passes something in terms of immigration reform, and that could really get them, moving, get them to force them to do something. So that's something that we're really trying to push behind.
And is any of this now, in my work with the ACLU, as some of you may know, comprehensive immigration reform and a lot of the work we've done in terms of trying to push back secure communities locally is a priority issue for the ACLU. I think we've gotten a lot of traction on that. I know in solidarity with the Immigration Action Group, with some of Paul's organizations, even Occupy Santa Cruz, the Santa Cruz County Immigration Reform Team, we've been able to talk to the sheriff and push that back. So locally, we have been able to get some traction on that. But what I was more interested in was the dreamer aspect of it. Is there some, because I hear that about the dreamers, and it's such a profound and an emotional, response, I think, in a lot of people. Let's get the dreamers, the dream awakening, the dreaming fulfilled. Is that something that you're pushing on as your advocacy goes forward?
Well, I mean, as an organization, I think that's something that we'd have to really look at in really close detail. But I mean, personally for me, it's not something that I would ever buy. I think for me, what I believe is that my parents are just as deserving on a path to citizenship as I am.
Interesting.
So personally for me, I would not support something like the DREAM Act. For me, I think it has to be something where we're taking care of all 11 million people at one time.
Interesting.
This is an issue that affects all of us. Just as it affects my mom, it affects me, and I think it needs to be an issue that's solved at once.
And I think as part of this, a couple of months ago, they had the Pathway to Citizenship Caravan came through, and it went through a lot of the neighboring jurisdictions, and I was fortunate enough to be able to participate here, and then I ended up in Bakersfield. Paul, what's your view of the Pathway to Citizenship and how that plays out as part of comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, the issue of immigrant youth and their prospects is something that it's obviously it moves us, it moves even some Republicans, and it certainly is a thing that immigrant families care about more than anything else. And so it's understandable that that support for the DREAM movement, for the notion of immigrant youth who were brought here as children having the option, the ability to work legally, to be able to go to college, etc., is something people have been supporting and fighting for years. But what we've seen happen in the last few years, and just in the last year, it's been very dramatic, and even in the last few weeks, is immigrant youth themselves emerging as a vanguard, as a fighting force for immigrant rights. And that's so important because we know that rights really are never won without a struggle. And it's not until the people who are directly affected get out and fight for them that they're achieved.
True.
And what we've been seeing before President Obama acted on deferred action, he was being besieged, and as was Speaker Pelosi, by immigrant youth. And now, I think this notion, it really would be worthwhile to take another minute or so and expand on what the idea is, because perhaps people in the audience don't know about what deferred action means, why the president has the authority, and this call to extend it to not only immigrant youth, but to their family members as well. And also it would be good to hear more about the actions that people are taking just in the past few weeks to put themselves on the line for immigration justice.
Kathy, a response on, or Cesar, on deferred action? We can develop that topic a little more?
Well, I just want to say that within COPA, that's actually, we're taking some pride in some work with a program called Dreamweavers at UCSC and helping some of the young people there get acclimated in the university system. And it's more a hands-on program, but it's vital, and it's providing mentorship to young people who haven't had this kind of experience before and left home with those fears that they might not have a home tomorrow, that their parents are going to be picked up. The anxiety level. One of the psychologists who's a member of my synagogue and works on campus in the student services, she tells me that she treats a student there, and she dreams that every night, that while she's here in the university and protected as a dreamer student, that she's fearful that her parents and her sisters are going to be gone one day, and what's going to happen to her. So I really appreciate that while we have this program for young people, that the whole family needs to be protected. And I think from a religious context, when we think about and our own ancestors and how they got to America, they came together. You had, older brothers and sisters. I was reading today about 6 members of Congress, who all Jews who came, whose relatives came to America, including Eric Cantor, and they came with their mothers and their sisters and their brothers, and they didn't want to leave anybody behind because, when you got there, and if you're alone, that's the hardest. And that's also true of not just in the Jewish reform movement, but also the Catholic social teachings. That's what it's about. It's not just about securing the border.
Of course,
and providing for the young people. And the bishops have talked about that in August of this year, again, to promote this and making sure that families are kept intact as much as possible.
Cesar, your thoughts about deferred action?
Well, deferred action, just for everybody out in the audience, is a presidential power that's been used over and over again to defer people's deportation. Deferred action for deportation, and it's a presidential power that the White House has, that the President of the United States has, and with the DREAM Act not getting off the ground in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, he took it upon himself to set up this special policy saying that if you're of a certain age, you could apply, show that you're a good student, that you contributed to the community, and you could get a deferred action, but it's not a permanent fix. That's the problem, is that you could age out of this program. So if is it 32? Is it
31?
Well, 31, and when you become that age, you're at a status again. You don't have permission to be in the United States, and that's a presidential power that he could expand to everybody that is undocumented in the U.S. to set up a mechanism, but it is temporary in nature. If let's say another president comes into the White House, he or she will have could say enough is enough and stop the program. And so at the end, the immigrant community is clear that comprehensive bill is needed. A comprehensive bill means that it covers the family. Kathy was right. We don't want to sacrifice one family member for the other. And for many years, that's what the Republicans have played. To be really partisan in nature. To say, well, let's take care of the students, but let's not take care of the farm workers, or let's take care of this niche group, or you could buy yourself into it by paying a $10,000 fine, which once again, average salary of a farm worker is $14,000 a year. So it could be $10,000, it could be $1 million. It's still unreachable. But there is fixes that could be done permanently, but there's fixes that a president could do now, and he could show to the country some leadership around immigration reform. Signal to the Latino community, because we showed that we could come out in numbers. In between the 2008 election to 2012, all the segments of the community declined in turnout. The 18 to 25-year-olds,
which are historically underrepresented,
et cetera, different groups.
Yeah.
The one segment of the community that actually increased by a huge number was the Latino community. That was a slap in the face to the country to say, guess what? Immigrants are here in the United States, and they need humane immigration reform that's comprehensive in nature, that won't split up families. And so we have two fixes on the table. We could have a fix by the Senate and the House actually doing their job and getting a bill to the president that he's willing to sign, that is humane, that takes into consideration the whole family. And then there's action that the White House could do by themselves, defer action, fix the problem now, give time for the House, the Senate to do their job, and do their job is a little hard to say because the
it's
benchmark
concise,
is only
it's
so
direct,
high.
so.
But do their job, And at the same time, you actually let this segment of the population that's actually here working. Studies have shown that immigrants bring back more to the community than take away. And kind of, this whole notion of, immigrants are taking our jobs. Immigrants are, which I challenge anybody to go and work for 8, 10, 11 hours out in the fields.
Of course.
If on a good day, and on most days you're not even working at all, at the minimum wage or a little bit above. So, studies have shown that it's an economic benefit. You're actually asking people to pay to apply, which, I'm not saying, $10,000 because that's too much, but if it's a decent amount, it would be a revenue to the country. It'll bring the people out of the shadows, and the problems can be fixed. In a temporary nature, President Obama could do it now, and in a permanent nature, House of Representatives, the Senate could get off their butt and do something in a permanent nature.
And before I go to Luis, I think we have a phone call. Do we have somebody calling in? Give the number. Pardon me? Oh, 425-8844 if anybody wants to call in and talk to any of these fascinating guests, as I'm enjoying. And so, Luis, it seems like this speaks particularly to youth, that if they're not impacted by deferred action now, they someday may be, when they reach a certain age. Is that a priority issue for you, something that you really are examining and trying to get some traction on?
Well, for sure. I think it just makes sense for us to take action now. And I think when we look at this idea of deferred action for all, it's really something that the president could do tomorrow. And his policies that he's implemented that have led to the 2 million deportations, more than any other president in the history of the United States, is simply outrageous. And for us to give the president or Democrats or anyone else a pass on the treatment of our community is ridiculous. The detention centers, the expansion, the privatization of the detention centers, where we have people that are committing suicide in the detention centers because the situations are so horrendous. These are the issues that should be addressed, not simply looking at
and which is not reported.
No.
In the general media that we've deported more people in the last 4 years.
Well, and there are certainly many tens of thousands, some say hundreds of thousands of people who are detained in these, various prisons and jails all across the country, who are in that kind of netherworld of, not being able to be here and not being able to be anywhere else. Before we go to the really draconian question of what happens if a comprehensive immigration reform doesn't pass.
Plan B is what you're talking about.
Is there a plan B?
Well, this is the kind of leadership that organizations like the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance is offering, the Dreamers are offering, which is, let's demand that President Obama keep the promises that he made, that he has the power to do himself by extending deferred action to the larger community. And the direct action, the civil disobedience that immigrant youth are exercising now, today, here in California and across the country, to actually block the buses that are coming into our community, coming here to Santa Cruz every few days and picking people up who've been picked up for minor crimes, for deportation, I think it's really an inspiration. So I think that's it. Whether federal immigration reform passes or not, there are going to be serious remaining civil rights issues, and so that's why I think this larger direction, this larger vision that's being offered by immigrant youth, by dream activists who are not just mobilizing but for themselves, but for their families and for the larger community, is really important. On a personal note, I personally served as the organizer for Organizing for America, the Obama operation here on the Central Coast until about 2 years ago, when the numbers of deportations had reached such a point, and through the Secure Communities program, the intensity of deportation had become so severe that I just couldn't associate myself with it and still work well with my friends in the community. And so I stepped back from that role. And I do think that President Obama needs to have his feet put to the fire, and this is partly what's happening now. And if comprehensive immigration reform fails to pass, there is an avenue forward, and I think that's the point that's being made. But at the same time, I guess I want to say that I've rarely allowed myself to be infected by hope ever since President Nixon drafted me to go to Vietnam.
Well, we're going to restore your hope this evening, Paul. If we do nothing else, we're going to restore your hope.
I did succumb to it to work for the Obama campaign. But I do have hope for California. That's the thing that's encouraging. We are turning a corner here in this state and setting a direction. And I feel very optimistic about what could happen in the coming year.
And I think before we turn to kind of where we are state and locally, I will say that one of the things that the ACLU is doing nationally, I think, is working in advance of what if we don't get comprehensive immigration reform? Because it still is an issue of civil liberties. It still is an issue, in my mind, of equal protection. And that's the kind of thing that should be extended to everybody. And I think that they are working hard on that. I myself have written several articles recently about how I think equal protection denied to anyone is denied to us all. Yeah. And so I think that's something that we should take to heart when we're considering, whether or not there is going to be legislation that's going to really afford these protections, or whether or not we might have to take a hand in it ourselves somehow and have some more direct action to make this happen.
Well, and that's part of it is that we're not naive. It's what's going to come out of the House and the Senate when or if we get something is not going to be the ideal bill. Because we're dealing with human individuals from across the country that have different pull and push factors. A member of Congress out of Salinas and Watsonville and Santa Cruz, his universe is very different than a member of Congress out of Kentucky or out of North Dakota or wherever they came from. So I think the Plan A and Plan B discussion, I think Plan A and Plan B is the same thing. It's a never-ending challenge in Washington, in Sacramento, and in here our Board of Supervisors, our city councils, where working families that have documentation, do not have documentation, young and old, will always face challenges. And immigrants in particular are still going to face challenges. We got some victories actually this year. Luis Alejo, our assembly member from South Santa Cruz County and into the Salinas Valley, got a driver's license bill for immigrants. And people forgot in 1993 it was taken away. Prior to that, you could get that. So, you could get a driver's license because it was a community safety issue. Right. Everybody in the community wants people educated to know how to drive, and people want everybody to have car insurance. But if you're undocumented, you don't have the privilege of getting driver's ed. You don't have the privilege to pay auto insurance. And we fixed that. And in Sacramento, a state trust act was passed. Governor. I was going to say Governor Davis, but Governor Brown.
Yes, indeed. My goodness, we don't want to go back that
past that. So so there is hope in Sacramento. And there's hope in our communities here. We have progressive city councils, and that's what's important to turn out and vote and get active and be citizens of your community. But immigration reform is never going to end in regards to getting the perfect bill, getting the perfect language, and it really doesn't address the immigrants that will show up tomorrow.
And I think to illustrate your point, in that sometimes we get something that is a half a loaf. And even with the driver's license bill, it can only be used for operating of a vehicle. It can't be used for identification for any kind of services or financial aid or something like that, housing. And so it's not the bill that we would like to have seen. And yet it took 2 times to go before the governor before he decided he was going to sign the Trust Act. And all of us have worked in that area where we have urged the governor to sign the Trust Act, urged him to establish new protocols for secure communities in our way to prevent the kind of deportations that are going on nationally. That's how we can affect it in our community.
And what he said, Governor Brown said before he signed the driver's license bill, was a real clear statement to the federal government. It was, what? This is not our job to provide licenses, to provide students with funding for their education, to provide the Trust Act and create a better environment for people to be hopefully not deported. But this is the bet. We're going to do it in California and create a climate that gives people some hope in the meantime. It's not our job, but we're going to do it. And so, and that's the hope. And I'm glad that he said that, because he has taken some time to get there.
Well, certainly he has, and notwithstanding the fact that a lot of activists in Santa Cruz County from all across the spectrum have worked very hard to prevent deportations, as I say, in our county through the Secure Communities program. And when you bring it down to the fact that your friends and neighbors, are being deported, or as I wrote today in the Sentinel, I wrote an op-ed piece that the Secure Communities frustrates reporting of domestic violence in the minority community, where the Violence Against Women Act was a thing that protected that against retaliation, and yet they're being frustrated by doing that because they're afraid that their husbands, their significant others, if there's some domestic violence problem, that they report that and they're going to be deported. Not just the police coming, and not just counseling or something. They're going to be deported. They're going to lose their significant other and their breadwinner. That is something that's profound and direct. And happens to us every day in Santa. I use the us universally, but the us in Santa Cruz, and that's the thing that we have worked on. Paul has worked on, and we continue to work on that.
Yeah. I think it would be worthwhile to take a minute to think about further steps that could be taken here in California, that need to be taken, and that we have the power to take. And because this is a moment when we hear so much, for example, about access to health care and the Affordable Care Act, which of course excludes undocumented folk. And even the Senate legislation, if it were to be passed unchanged and signed unchanged, would continue to exclude undocumented folk.
Well, the point well taken. This is not just a moment. This is not just a moment nationally.
But we do have the capacity in California. Some counties. The reality is that Monterey County, which has the highest concentration of undocumented residents of any part of the whole state, in Monterey County and many other counties, especially in rural California, where you have a high concentration of undocumented folk, people don't have access to primary care, to ongoing chronic care. They have access to emergency room care and to care relating to childbirth, to family planning, but we have an epidemic of diabetes in these communities. Every single family has somebody who is in a life-threatening condition because of diabetes, and we have no chronic care. We have no care available to them. Santa Cruz County, fortunately, does offer that kind of care, but that's something that could be done on a statewide basis.
Correct me if I'm wrong, when they had the Trust Act, there was also kind of a basket of other bills that increased higher education to immigrant children, that increased access to health care, and I don't know what the progress of those bills were. Cesar,
it was actually a very positive year for immigrants at the Sacramento level. Even one of the bills that the governor signed added criminal charges against a company if they try and use immigration status.
I thought that was wonderful. I saw that. I said, now that's the kind of thing that should be effective legislation.
But it's great bills, and it's great when we get half a loaf as a community. It's better than no loaf at all, especially when you have
minimum wage increase.
Minimum wage increase. It's going to help a lot of individuals at the bottom of the employment scale get a little bit more money. By next July it's going to go up to $9, and 18 months after that it's going to go up to $10, which is one of the highest in the country as of today. Who knows if another state is going to increase even more. And so it's we're getting some movements. I think the immigrant community is getting some level of respect. I think we're becoming more sophisticated in the way that we vote. Our numbers are higher, which is good on the basic level. We're being strategic on who we support. But we can't do it alone. The Latino community is a segment of the community that votes at high numbers, but it's not the only segment of the community. And there's structural fixes that need to happen, not just in national federal level, not just Sacramento level. Healthcare is a crucial issue, and in the last month or so covered California and the which is the California version of the Affordable Care Act has really changed the verbiage around healthcare. Healthcare for all. Is how they're starting to come out and say that there's something for everybody, immigrants included. That they're in the process of setting up special programs that will help immigrants out. But at the end, it leads to leadership, and the Latino community, the community in general, needs to look at immigration reform, civil rights for not just Latino immigrants, but any immigrants, to really look at that as a priority, and don't look at that as a wedge issue. It's us against them.
And Luis, your observations about the year that we've had here in California in terms of the legislation for immigration, immigrant rights.
Well, it's definitely been a good year. We've seen a lot of, like people have already mentioned, the driver's license bill. Not as good as it could have been, but it's better than nothing. We see the Trust Act, where there was a lot of changes that the governor demanded. So not as many people are going to be protected, but it's still better than last year when he vetoed it. And then, like they mentioned, minimum wage. So we're seeing a lot of movement, and I think a lot of that, just like as people are saying, is immigrants are standing up and saying, "We're here. We're not going anywhere. We demand, these rights. We demand to be noticed, and we're going to continue fighting for more rights."
And I think Paul's call to action is well taken around the table. Kathy, what call to action would you have people take in terms of supporting comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, certainly the one that I mentioned before about calling Majority Leader Cantor and sending him the message to let your people vote is something that has been coming out in the last few days to make sure that this is in the forefront of the minds of the members of the House. But in addition to that, we in COPA, we've been trying to promote sermons from the pulpit on immigration reform, so that it agitates people, so you can think about this issue if you haven't before, and it's not too late, because we need all the help, all the assistance that we can get. And yes, we have a wonderful congressman in our area who is supportive of this, but there are dozens that are not, and they need the persuasion.
And in my activism over the years, I'm a street guy, and I have to be out in the street, talking to people and going to the events and going to the rallies, and I think that's the thing that galvanizes people into action, and particularly around an issue like that. I would like to see more of that. Is there a way that we can get more people engaged in that kind of grassroots, out in the street, direct action?
Well, there is. That's the whole thing. We can't leave it up to Washington to really do it themselves. No. We had actions in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago where a number of community leaders got arrested. National leaders got arrested. There was a summer of action here in California. Let's call it. We had 3 busloads of people that from our area here, where we have a very supportive member of Congress, very progressive, has shown leadership when we've asked them to do, to really step up on immigration reform. We sent 3 busloads of people to Bakersfield to do an action where we had hundreds of people in front of Kevin McCarthy's office.
That was the Pathway to Citizenship caravan that came through.
It was that caravan, and
it was wonderful event.
And
exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about.
And there's more actions of those coming up, because we have a small window, and once again, on this comprehensive immigration reform bill, we have a small window in November and early in December, but everybody says if we don't get any momentum going in November, it's going to be dead, and hopefully it'll come back to life in the spring of next year. So we have to keep going. There's a couple of phone numbers that people could call. There's actually a text messaging system that people are able to call. If people text now, NOW now, to this phone number, 235-246.
Say that again.
235-246. People could sign up on a national texting system, so they know when there's actually days of action or days to call certain numbers, to call key leaders. Because one of the things holding us up in Washington, D.C. is the Republican leadership in the House has said that they're not going to put it up for a vote, and I say this as an immigration reform, until a majority of the majority have an agreement. And a lot of us believe that we have the votes now if they're allowed to vote.
Well, I think it's important that we point out that there is some timeline, there is some sense of urgency, because I think people who have a casual view of comprehensive immigration reform, even if they are in favor of it, say, well, they're working on it, the Congress has got some bills going through, geez, the Senate did a great job, and now they're going to work this thing through. But unless there is continual pressure brought to bear on this, unless there is some sense of urgency from the people who are really activists behind these issues, then I think we're going to miss that window. We're going to go outside the window, and then as it goes farther along, you're going to have midterm elections where positions are going to be even more polarized on this and less comprehensive in terms of reaching some kind of
and then as soon as you get too close to re-election for the House and the Senate,
Absolutely.
people shy away from any controversial bills, and then if you stall it then, and then it gets too close to a presidential race, and people don't want to touch anything controversial back then. So we have a window now. We got to take action. I told everybody to text a number, but there's a couple of days of action in November coming up, and they're not locally. I'm kind of it really. Sometimes in a perfect system you have a bad member of Congress, and you rally this community, to do action. But we don't have that. We have a very progressive member of Congress, but we have to support those communities that don't have the same advantage that we do. And it's in the Central Valley. Let's put it out there. Jeff Denham, former state senator, Republican, just came out and announced he's going to support Nancy Pelosi on her bill. That's hopefully a beginning point for the rest of the Central Valley to do the same. Kevin McCarthy is the second in command. And has the ear of the leadership in the Republican Party, and he could push his leader to say vote. Just like Kathy said earlier, let my people vote. Well, let his people vote, and we have it, but it's not going to fix it all. It's whatever bill we get out of it, we can't rest.
And I do have a phone number for that too. For the majority leader's phone. It's to the cancer's office. 866-743-9763.
9763.
And your message is, let your people vote.
And I think that we're all, political activists in our own way. And as you know, politics is the art of the possible. What can we possibly make happen out of the various, choices that can be made and should be made and will be made on various types of legislation. Paul, what in the art of the possible, what do you think is possible in terms of a comprehensive immigration reform in your crystal ball in the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months?
I think it's a toss-up. I really do. And I think we're really at a moment of decision where it could go either way. And as I said before, I think even if something is passed, that it'll have serious problems. So I think that it's just very important that the movement escalate, and I think it's the new leadership of young immigrants that'll make that possible to happen. And I think the message for people who are most likely to be watching this show, who are probably not members of the immigrant community, is that what's at stake here is not just for immigrants, it's for all of us. It's what kind of state are we going to live in? And the fact is that the millions of new citizen voters and the children of immigrants who are coming into California's electorate are helping us to begin to turn this state away from the Duke Majan, Pete Wilson years and toward a state that supports education, a state that supports universal health care for all. We need all of us. We live in different communities, so perhaps many people who, like me, live in an Anglo community here in a neighborhood here in Santa Cruz aren't fully aware of the fact that there is a very substantial and growing and powerful community for us to ally ourselves with. So it's really in all of our interest to support expanded
and
rights.
We've got a couple of more minutes left. Kathy, some words of activism and wisdom for our viewers here on this issue?
When we gather in COPA, we open and close often with some kind of text study together. And with our partners that are from agencies or the Labor Council or so forth as well. And in preparing for tonight, I was really struck by those sections of the Bible that the bishops, the American Conference of Bishops, used to support this work, and the Reformed Jews to support this work. They're identical. It's from Leviticus chapter 19, verses 34 and 35, which is, you have been a stranger in a strange land in Egypt, and as a result, you should have respect and dignity and sojourn with others who are also strangers. And the next line is, and they should have a fair wage, and you should pay them on time.
Wonderful. Cesar? Some words from you for our audience as we go out.
Well, if there is potential to get a bill passed. I'm more concerned that we might rush to get something done and not and actually hurt the community more than help. But the possible is there, and I know for many of us, we'll take a deep breath after it passes, and maybe have a glass of wine or tequila or something.
Excellent, I'll join you in that.
and then get up and get back to working to improve what's there on the table. The new reality.
The struggle always continues. No question about it.
Continues.
Luis, some words from you to close out our evening.
Sure. I mean, this is our lives we're talking about here. This isn't something that we're going to stop fighting for after any bill passes. So I think if people are interested in getting involved, people are interested in hitting the streets, getting arrested, really pushing the envelope and asking ICE to stop doing what you're doing. Let's do it.
Well, this has been wonderful.
Perhaps we could also just put up, I think we have the United Farm Workers Action page.
Well, we're running out of time,
people
Paul.
couldn't go up
We can't do that. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Excellent. Kathy, great to see you again. Cesar, a pleasure as always. And Luis, a great pleasure in meeting you. Thank you all for tuning in to this program on Voices from the Village. For Charlie Phillips, our producer, for all the folks behind the cameras and in the engineering room, thank you for tuning in, and think about comprehensive immigration reform. It is the right thing to do. Good night, and thank you. So anyway, there you go. I wish we'd had time to do that, but they couldn't get up a graphic that quickly.
Well, he actually typed up the page.